that verse. But when you teach through a whole Bible book, you sometimes end up speaking from passages that a light read doesn't make it seem very important. But I hope you will discover with me that this is a beautiful word calling every congregation to be a church that cares. If we move slowly through this chapter, we're going to learn a great deal as to what it means to be a caring community. This section of the book of 1 Timothy is about relationships. And given the repeated emphasis on the importance of blending sound doctrine with godly living, it's not surprising that Paul takes time and attention to the area of life that has so much potential for a public display of our inner character. How we treat each other in the church is a display to the unbelieving world just what we're like. At the top of your sermon note sheet, I put John 13, 34, and 35, at least part of it. It says, "Love one another, for by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." A church that cares, loves each other, is like a close family. And that's very appealing, very attractive. That's God's plan. That's how He meant it to be. Turn with me, if you haven't, to 1 Timothy chapter 5. It's page 1849 in the Pew Bible, if you want to use that. 1 Timothy chapter 5, and we want to read the first 16 verses. Find out just what we're supposed to do with widows. 1 Timothy 5, verse 1, "Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions too, so that no one may be open to blame. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the saints, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they will want to marry. Thus they will bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have, in fact, already turned away to follow Satan. If any woman who is a believer has widows in her family, she should help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. Now, the question I want us to ask of this passage is, how can we display Christ's love in the church by loving one another? Let's learn some principles from this. Just what actions make us look good if we do them in a biblical and godly way, and what will make us look bad if we don't follow these instructions. So I'm making a list of principles. And the first one is, we care for each person as an individual. Every congregation is composed of all different types of people because every person is unique. I immediately can look out here and I can say, yep, every one of you is unique. I can tell you're different from all the rest. The instructions are comprehensive. They're covering all possible relationships, older men, older women, younger women. The instructions were directed for Timothy to guide him in his relationship with church folks. The basic principle of a church that cares is that of diversity. We recognize this diversity. We don't put people into boxes and lump them together with others. We recognize that there's diversity as God made us. Every congregation, large or small, must become a place where each person is treated and cared for as an individual. Yet many things in the church work against this ideal, so we need to think about that. Timothy is directed to treat older men different than younger men, and older women different than younger women. The word rebuke here means a severe censure. Although Timothy has been given a whole lot of encouragement and I guess power to go ahead and deal with false teachers, his attitude to older men is not to be harsh even if they need correction. This is true because his relationships in the church are like those in a family household. Older people are to be treated more tenderly, while younger folks sometimes need a stronger confrontation. That is good common sense. As I am rapidly becoming one of those older people, I'm very aware that I don't respond to rebuke the same way I used to. And the older we get, the less we are likely to change. And with increasing years, I find that a gentler confrontation is more likely to get me to consider change. I'm not suggesting that younger people respond with instant change to severe censure, but I recall occasions that the confrontation needed to be direct and strong in my life, or I probably wouldn't have even heard it. The impression I remember from my past is those who were direct and forthright as they spoke to me. Young folks often need directness, or they might miss the message. This is not to say that we should be less loving and caring for the younger, nor that we should be patronizing to older people. But happy we will be when we learn how to treat different folks with different strokes. I guess that's it. A church that cares is a fellowship in which each person, young and old, male or female, receives correction and guidance in ways that take their differences respectfully and seriously. This passage is more readily understood and accepted maybe in the Far East, where tradition holds elders in more respect. It is in need of greater emphasis in our culture, which generally ignores or rejects older people. The Christian community treats its older men and women with firm and tender exhortation as fathers and mothers. It exhorts and trains its younger folks as brothers and sisters. We are a family. We care for each other like family members. First principle, we care for each person as an individual. Number two, we give specialized care to older widows and special needs folks. Look again at verse 3. It says, give proper recognition to those widows who are in need, who are really in need. And verse 5, the widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask for God's help. And then jump down to verse 9. It says, no widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the saints, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. Obviously, Paul is setting forth special guidelines for treatment of widows in Ephesus. Because of the difference in our culture from that day, I find this passage to be much more helpful in its application when I expand this to include any particular group of people with special needs. So I suggest that you consider it that way. Not only think of widows, but think of special need folks. And that helps this passage get applied better. Sorting out widows was a headache in the early church. And since Paul put so much writing on this, it's apparent that they weren't doing it very well. It may seem obvious who is a widow and who is a widow in need, Why does the church need to spend so much time sorting this out? Well, we can see from the answers that there were some questions behind it. Questions like which widows truly are in need. Second, what is the responsibility of the family and relatives? Number 3, how can the church determine which widows qualify for inclusion on the list? And number 4, how shall the church deal with women who do not qualify for the list? It's my experience in the church that there's lots of people who would like the church to provide their living, either partially or totally. We get regular appeals from people in our community that want us to pay their rent or pay their utilities. They have nothing to do with the church, but churches are full of nice people, so I'm going to call up there and see if they'll give me some money. I've watched folks over the years even come into the church, become members even, and then expect regular payout from our fellowship fund. But of course, the church has meager resources for that. And we must not waste it on people who are not really in need or on people who would not be helped by giving them money because maybe they're feeding some kind of a habit. So how do we determine the needs of those to be supported by the church? Here Paul gives some general guidelines that can helpfully guide us. First of all, they are people that have little or no human support. If a widow had relatives, they should care for her so that the church might use its resources for others who have no help. In the ancient world, in Rome, life was short. People were considered old at their 40s. There were few widowers because the men died earlier. Many of them were conscripted to go off and fight in a war, or they were just plain overworked. There were accidents in their work, and they just did not live that long. We also need to remember that the society in that day did not have the kinds of institutions that we have today. There wasn't pensions and Social Security, retirement homes, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, lower-priced housing, etc. So you can see how important the family care and the church care was. So first determination is that the individual is really without human support. Second, they are believers with a faithful testimony. Doesn't that come across from this passage? The church cannot care for all the widows in the city, but it can care for the needy ones in its fellowship. As I was working on this passage, I remembered back to the church that Gladys and I attended when we were in high school. It was a little church, had very little resources. They did a lot of things wrong, I think, in that church, but they did one thing very right. There was a little lady in that church who had never married. She was physically handicapped and had never worked. Her mother had provided for her until her mother died, but then Lola Thompson was left alone. All she had was the church. 60 years ago, there was practically none of the government resources that we have today. This little lady had taught Sunday school. She played the piano for the church as long as she was able, and she had a very solid Christian testimony. Therefore, each year, as the church figured out their budget with their meager little money, there was a line item. They didn't call it this, but it was support for Lola Thompson. And that continued until she died. Lola qualified, and it was right that the church supported her in this way. The person the church helps should not be a self-indulgent person seeking pleasure, but a godly person who hopes in God and has a ministry of intercession and prayer. Third, there was an age requirement. They met the age requirement. A woman that was 60 was not likely to get remarried in that day. Mostly there wasn't any men that age around anymore. And 60 is not considered that old today, but in that day it was. It was very old. Verse 9 speaks of putting them on a list of widows. Apparently the early church had an official list of names of qualified widows. We get the impression that these enlisted women ministered to the congregation in various ways. Remember in Acts 9, the mention of Dorcas and her widow friends? Dorcas did so many good works that the church just loved her. Age was another indication that these ladies had no support. Fourth, they had a good marriage record. We have come across this requirement before for overseers and bishops and deacons. She has been faithful to her husband. She is a one-man woman. That was her lifestyle. Faithfulness to one's marriage vows is very important in the eyes of God, and it would be a bad witness to non-believers if someone had a poor marriage record and yet the church was supporting them. And fifth, they had a witness of good works. Look at verse 10 again. It says, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the saints, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. Bringing up children here probably refers to her own children, but they had since then died, otherwise they would be supporting her, or to orphans. They had a thing in that day, a practice where they would rescue abandoned children and raise them to love the Lord. And you can see by this list of good works that those whom the church helped were outstanding women of God. Every pastor gives thanks for godly women who minister to the material and physical needs of the congregation. That's such a great work. I suggest that for us, the widows of that day are representatives in our day of all who are without help, without resources, and without anyone to care. There are millions of them in the world. There are thousands of them in the United States. If the church doesn't care for them in special ways, who will? That governments and other agencies should and do provide care does not relieve the church of its mandate and responsibility. Now, we could wish that the task were simple. It never has been. It never will be. As soon as Paul articulated the mandate and laid out some rules, he had to deal with some of the complicating factors that are part of every effort to care for people with special needs. The third principle, we take care of our family responsibilities. Take care of our family responsibilities. Verse 4 says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Verse 7, give the people these instructions too, so that no one may be open to blame. If anyone does not provide for his own relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And verse 16 kind of wraps it up. If any woman who is a believer has widows in her family, she should help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church may help those widows who are really in need. The first responsibility was to take care of the widow in your family, the immediate family, the children and grandchildren. Verse 3 says we are to give proper recognition to older widows. This comes from the word honor. Honor and shame are part of this passage, they're a theme. Verse 4 says children and grandchildren are to put their religion into practice, caring for their own family. And verse 7 says they would be open to blame if he does not care for his relatives. You honor your parents when you take care of their needs, and you shame yourself and you shame the Church of Jesus Christ when you let your parents continue in need and you don't take care of them. It's a matter of having a solid testimony in the community. If you don't honor your parents by providing them, verse 8 says you have denied the faith and you're worse than an unbeliever. In all these ways, showing Christ's love by caring for those in the church family, We just have to guess that they weren't doing that well in Ephesus, and so Paul needed to bring up the subject. My doctoral dissertation was on the subject of the biblical mandate to care for aging parents and how we can do that well. My own mother was going through a time when she needed care, and that was a subject that was very fresh on my mind as I was going through that, and so that became the subject of my dissertation. In my research, I learned that many of us do not act quickly enough to care for an aging parent. Most parents in our time don't need financial help so much as they would need medical help, making decisions about driving and living so they are safe, taking medications correctly, remembering what the doctor says on that visit. Well, we help by going with them. We're there to help them. I probably felt very emotionally strung out about this. It's a role reversal. Children aren't used to all of a sudden helping a parent. Hey, they help us. I mean, that's the way it works. All of a sudden, it's not comfortable. So we kind of go through that. And I probably waited too long to help my mother when she was declining. We also need to be very loving and gentle. It is uncomfortable for an aging person to have family members begin helping them make decisions. So there's emotional strain on both sides, and we can expect that. Pray about it. Be gentle, loving, and caring. And of course, don't do what isn't needed. Do what is needed. Everything allows choices. So Mom and Dad need to be given an opportunity to make as many decisions as they are able to. Fourth principle. We challenge younger widows to live godly and productive lives. Verses 11 through 15 focus on the younger widows. It says, "As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house, and not only do they become idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have, in fact, already turned away to follow Satan." Apparently, the younger widows were creating some problems at Ephesus, and the contrast between the older and the younger widows is stronger than we might expect. It's not merely that the younger widows were likely to marry and therefore not need financial help. They are to be refused rather than enrolled because of their sensual desires that may become between them and Christ. The verb overcome contains the idea of luxuriating or giving way to lustful impulses. It was used to describe the kings of Babylon living in luxury and sensuality. Verse 12 says that they will bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their vow. Apparently there was some kind of a pledge given when somebody was included on the widow's list, and again we see the reference to shame instead of being honored in the community because they would be acting dishonorably. So some reasons for refusing financial help. Let's list a few. Because, first of all, they would naturally want to marry again. If the younger widows were put on the roll of those who were supported by the church, made the commitment to prayer and good works, marrying again would break that commitment. Paul seems to imply that each of the widows enrolled pledged themselves to remain a widow and serve the Lord in the church. And this pledge should not be interpreted as a vow of celibacy, nor should we look at this group of widows as a special monastic order like the Roman Catholic Church has established. It's difficult to draw any absolute conclusions because we only have a general picture of what Paul referred to with these widows and their duties, but there seems to be an agreement between the widows and the church that they would remain widows and occupy their time with serving the Lord. So, first of all reason, they didn't want to marry again, so don't put them on the list. Second, because they have time on their hands and get involved in sinful activities. The younger widows were supported by the church. If that happened, well, they would have opportunities to live it up. That would allow them to get involved in sinful activities. You can imagine how they would have time to go from woman to woman, polish their skills at being gossips and general busybodies. When I was a boy for, 8-10 years, we lived in a trailer, and we lived in trailer courts or trailer parks. Many of the young women were married and had a batch of kids. And with their husbands off to work for long hours, they would have all kinds of time on their hands. In those days, there were only a few channels of commercial television, and there was little to keep them cooped up in their little trailer house, especially in the summer when it was hot out and those trailers got warm. So what would happen? They would go from house to house, and everybody knew everybody else's business. There were frequent squabbles. There would be this part of the park would be speaking to this other part. And I thought it was kind of amusing as a early teenager, all that excitement going on. But it was very unhealthy. And they were not Christians. But I can understand how the culture of Paul's day would create a similar unhealthy situation. Even worse, for the ones Paul wrote to, would be in the church. It would cause trouble in the church. It would hurt the name of Christ. And the final reason that you deny financial support is because the church's charity would encourage idleness. They would get in the habit of being idle instead of being useful. There's a definite connection between idleness and sin. In so many ways, in so many levels, work is a wonderful gift from God. I know Monday morning you don't think that's a good gift, but believe me, it is. In these days in America, our government has stepped in to provide help for low-income families. The more children you have, the more money you get. In some large cities, whole neighborhoods of housing projects are almost entirely made up of single-parent families who do not work outside the home. And this often begins a train of dependency that promotes daughters of welfare mothers to become welfare mothers themselves. And sometimes that goes on for generations. Now, I appreciate the help for the low-income families. I think there needs to be a real hard job of breaking that chain of dependency and getting people working, becoming responsible. That's so much a good part of life. I'm glad there's more movement in that direction. They know the problem. They're working on that. But it's easy to see what Paul is thinking here. Quite frankly, most of us do not do more than we have to. That's just the way we're built. And so it's easy, if we have no incentive to do anything, to do nothing. Now, along with the reasons for not putting them on the roll, some requirements for younger widows. First of all is marry again and have families. Paul also listed the positive things he wanted the younger widows to do in order to be accepted and approved by the church. He wanted them to marry and have families. While not every person is supposed to get married, marriage is pretty natural for people who have been married before. As a young woman, why maintain a lonely widowhood if there is opportunity for a husband and a family? Of course, all this needs to be in the Lord. The person has to be God's man if this widow is going to get married again. I'm sure you all have watched men or women who have lost a spouse and make the mistake of marrying too quickly to an unsuitable person. And because of their loneliness, they actually amplify their problems. A new marriage, however, a good marriage and a family will keep a young widow busy and productive. The second thing that he would say to them, manage your homes well. A wife should manage the affairs of the household. Husband should trust her to do so. Of course, marriage is a partnership, and each partner has a special sphere of responsibility. And each couple is going to have to work out what part they're able to take in that, especially if there's need for the lady of the house to work outside the home. I have found that, however, there's some things that ladies naturally are good at. And even if the husband does much of the care for the home and the children, she needs to provide her expertise and some oversight in that area. Let's wind it up by talking of the good result when this all happens and it works out and the church does it well. The result of this is a good testimony that silences the accusers. Satan is always alert to an opportunity to invade and destroy the Christian home. A Christian wife who is not doing her job at home gives Satan a beachhead for his operations. How Christian wives and mothers manage their home and families can be a huge testimony to the outside world. There's not many out there that are doing it well anymore. So when you can stand up as a Christian family and show the world what a Christian family is like and how God desired it to work, you have a huge impact just by your life. So we learned that the church family is to show its love for one another by how it cares for its members in need. We understand that each person is an individual, and we care for them as individuals. We give special care to older widows who have little or no support, and to those who are special needs people. We determine what their needs are and meet those needs according to our ability. But to maintain a good witness, it is also a loving action to make sure we're not meeting wants of others that would encourage them to dependency and sinful activities. One action is that a great testimony in how we care for our immediate family. That's a very important factor. It's honorable and positive to give good biblical care, and it's a shame and a poor testimony when we don't give that care. Now here at Living Hope, let me just close by mentioning how we think about things here. How do we work that out as a church? Well, we have found it's best for Living Hope's ministry to give through the fellowship fund the care that we can give to those who need it in our church family. The overseers are the one that manage that particular fund, and that's good because they are representative of the church. And in our size church, you just kind of know everybody. You know the situations, and they can act wisely to meet real needs. For the needy outside the church, we have quite frankly come to the painful conclusion that we give no one money. It doesn't work. It turns out best if we work through ministries and agencies. For instance, we support My Father's House and Snowcap regularly. And that way we can send people there. There's lots of different ministries and agencies in our city that help people who have troubles like that. And the reason it works better to work through these is because they can do background checks that require papers and documents and stuff like that to determine really where the person is. And so you can give money where it's really needed. And they have the time to do that. We really don't have an extra pastor to spend time doing that, and we don't have that much money to give anyway, so that works best for us. Now, one other word, because it sometimes happens, I would encourage you not to give anybody money who comes into the church and ask for it. Now, the ushers, we have tried to work on this. They try to be cognizant of people that might come in to do that. They're not really here to worship. They're quite frankly here to panhandle. And they will come up to you, and you have tender hearts, and you want to help people. And so when they give you the sad story, you have a tendency to pull a bill out of your pocket and give it to them. Well, we're suggesting don't do that. In fact, you don't even have to say no. Just say, well, let me take you to a person who can answer questions about that. And you take them to Pastor Andrew. I love that. Administrative pastor. Isn't that wonderful? Or you could take them to a board member too. But they can then guide them into what we do and what we don't do as a church, and that kind of solves that problem. Consider your responsibility to give care to folks in the church and in your family. And I think these guidelines will direct you. And you can glorify God in a huge way by doing it God's way. It makes all the difference. Pray with me. Our God, we thank you that you have entrusted us with resources. We go out and work, we have money, we have things to work with. You've provided that. And we want to use it in the best way for your glory. So we pray, Father, that you would guide us in that as a church, you'd guide us as individuals, and you would bring honor to yourself in it. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.